Welcome to another video on data to decisions. In today's video, we will be building a stacked column chart with a slider. For example, when you want to represent your actual metric value, instead of a single target value, if you want to compare it against a spectrum, then that is where this chart will be helpful. For example, on screen, you see the different products on the x-axis. I'm just calling it A, B, C, D, E, F. And we have defined the poor, average, and good performance scales. For example, under 20, under 30, it is poor, 30 to 70 is average performance, and then 70 to 100 is good performance. So if in any cases where you have these kind of spectrum of performance measurement ranges and you want to present them and also show the actual value. So in this case, product A score is 80. And so you can see that there is a slider type of visual with 80. And then the background is the poor, average, and good performance spectrums. So if your business data has this type of structure, then you can use this chart. We're going to build this chart from scratch in this video. So let's get started. So we'll get started with raw data in the same structure as I explained before. We have a category axis or a column with values, and then we have the poor, average, good ranges, and then we have the actual score for each of our category. Now let's first build using the first four columns here. I'm going to insert. I will select them with a clustered column, 2D clustered column, and it'll look like this. Now we're going to right click on one of these columns, format data series, and make sure that the overlap is 100%. This actually makes all of those columns together and overlap them. We can only see one at this point. If this is what happens to you, right click on this, select data, and make sure that whichever is the lower value series, make sure that comes to the bottom. In my case, I've called it poor. So I'm going to click on that and move it to the bottom. And then the highest value, in my case, I called it good. That should be at the top. So make sure it's in this order. And if you have more than three, make sure that it's still, again, in this order of increasing magnitude when you go from the bottom to the top in the series. Now, this now gives us this appearance where I'm going to now click on this lowest series. And you can also go from the right side panel here. You can, because I named them, I can now go and select the poor series and click on this. And I'm going to choose a little bit darker blue. And I will go to the average, select solid fill and do a little bit of a less dark. And then I will choose good and I will choose the lightest one. So poor, again, going from the bottom to the top, darker to the lighter shade of blue. Now that is done. Now I need to start adding the slider, which is the interesting part of this. So in order to add the slider, there are multiple ways. So you can add a line series with a marker, and the marker looks like a horizontal line. That is one approach. I'm going to use a different approach here to actually calculate a slider, which we will use stacked column approach to put a base. Let me show you that again in this. The slider, the horizontal gray slider, is actually sitting on top of an invisible column, which we're going to call it as base column. It's actually sitting stacked on top of an invisible column. So that's what we need to be building. So we can control the height of the slider. Let's say, we can just make it, in my case, 5, and I'm just going to select them. We can also put a formula. I'll come back to that later, but let's say we hard code it to be 5. Because my data set is right now maximum is 100 value. So if I want my slider to be 5 units tall, I can just put 5. Now, what is the base column, which is going to be invisible, and this will be actual minus slider. So this will be like this, and things will become more clear once we add them to the chart. So what I'm going to do now is to right click and select data. I'm going to add the base series and this, okay. And then I'm going to add the slider series, which is nothing but 5, okay. And The important thing at this step is that the slider series um, is here at the bottom. So I'm going to click OK. We'll come back and check that. I'm going to right click and change chart type. This is an important step here. You want to make sure that the base and the slider are in a different axis. So I'm going to move them to the secondary axis. I still want them to be a stacked column. So make sure that this is stacked column on the secondary axis, while the other three series are clustered column in the primary axis. So make sure that your design also looks like this and hit OK. And now obviously, it looks different than what we want. And let's clean it up a little bit. So I want to make sure that the base is invisible, right? And so you can click directly on that. If you're not able to, you can go to here and choose base. And I'm going to make it no fill. So this, what it does, you can see that the purple is the slider and it looks like this. What has happened is when we added those series, Excel has made the clustered column not overlap 100%. So I'm going to right click on Format Data Series. Make sure you choose the good. You can choose one of the good, average, or poor series and make sure you enter 100%. Okay. So now it looks a lot closer to what we want to see. What I'm going to do now next is I want the slider to actually be protruding out on both sides of my blue column. And so in order to do so, we will control the gap width. So once you are on the chart, go into and choose one of the first three series. I'm going to choose good. I can go here and see that the gap width, let's say it's 200%. I want the gap width for the slider series, so I'm going to go and select the slider to be half of that. So this will create an appearance where the slider is wider than the blue columns. If you want to change it, you can always try, instead of 100, if you try, for example, 75%, the slider is going to go wider. So make sure that the two C axes, the primary and the secondary, the gap width are adjusted according to how wide you want the slider to be. How tall you want the slider to be, you can control it directly here, right? So instead of 5, if I type in 2, you'll see that the slider has become thinner, right? So this is how you can control the height of the slider by the number here, and how wide it is, you will control it using the gap width setting. Okay. So just to recap again, the gap width I have entered here. So the gap width needs to be smaller for the slider series. So keep that in mind. How much smaller you make, that how wide the slider becomes. Now, the last part I want to tell you is also, in my case, my data, I hard coded this to be 2 or 5, but there is a way you can automate it, make it dynamic. So what I would do is, for example, I can do a maximum of the highest series that you have. Okay. And then I'm going to lock this. So max of this, and I can put a percentage. So let's say I want it to be 2% of the maximum value. In my case, the maximum is 100. So if I do 2%, I'm going to get 2, right? So let's say if I want to do 3%, I can do 0.03. And maximum of the list series multiplied by 3% is what I'm trying to do now. And I can apply this everywhere. So now my slider is 3 is the unit, that's the height of the slider, and it will dynamically change. Let's say I want to make this good be 150. Now you see that as the data changed, the slider also changed in its height. So it becomes a dynamic way of creating it. Now let's just clean it up and finalize the chart appearance. We don't want to show the base column, which is invisible. We don't want that user to see that item here on the legend. So you can click on it specifically, hit delete, and it will go away. I don't want to say slider in the legend. So in order to change that, I will go to select data, and instead of the slider, you can call it metric or actual, let's say, and hit OK. That is purely for the legend purposes, because in the legend, we don't want it to say slider. We want it to say something more meaningful. And then the other part is we haven't added the data labels. So you can right click on the slider and add the label. But here, and then click on the label, make the label options inside base. Okay, so it sits kind of there. The interesting part here is that we don't want the slider label 4.5 here. We want the actual value in column F. So Excel's wonderful feature where you don't have to use the actual value. You can uncheck the value and say, go and take the value from a different set of cells. So I can now choose the actual values. And now, there we go. So you have this, and if I want my slider to be a little bit thinner. There we go. I did 2%, and it looks like this. Amazing. Exactly what we wanted. Right click on format, no line, and or you can have very thin lines. It's up to you, your choice. And then I'm going to change the title to performance measurement by product, and I will format the title and move it away so that it doesn't overlap with my legend. And I will make the size of the font a little bit smaller. There we go. So, and then another important thing, which I totally forgot, it's my mistake, is that since we put it on the secondary axis, we have to make sure that we delete the axis. Otherwise, it will give you incorrect results. For example, here, the actual value says 80. You look at the y-axis, it's 140. So it's an important thing. When you created it on the secondary axis, still we have to go back and click on the axis, delete it. Now you see that the slider has moved to the right spot 80. The slider here is 45. That is exactly 45. So the y-axis represents these values correctly. That's it. So I can add x-axis titles and y-axis titles. In this case, it's very clear what I'm measuring, so I'm not going to add those titles. I will click here and do a border around my chart just to finish up. And clicking on the chart, the border, rounded corners. There we go. So this is another way you can represent your actual against a target value, where the target is not a single value, it's a spectrum of poor, average, or good. In your case, it could be satisfactory, moderate, not satisfactory, or good, better, excellent, whatever your ranges you may call them. But now you can represent them on a visual like this very easily in Microsoft Excel. I look forward to hearing your feedback and suggestions. Please let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon in the next one.